Welcome to the Exploress, time traveling through women's history, one era at a time. I'm Kate Armstrong. You make your way through an immaculate garden. You admire the small tea house before you, a simple, rustic structure made of wood and bamboo nestled beneath the trees. All tea houses are situated amongst quiet, natural settings to encourage guests to calm their minds and disconnect from daily life before entering its peaceful and civilized embrace. You wash your hands in the stone basin outside the tea house and take off your tabby shoes. You have to stoop. The entrance is built purposefully low to force guests to bow and to remind them that all are equal in the tea house, regardless of their class. You step onto the soft tatami mats into a minimalist space, sunlight streaming in through the paper walls. A silk scroll of a tranquil landscape hangs on the far wall. A bronze vase of artfully arranged flowers sits in the corner, and a low wooden table dominates the space. You go to it and kneel beside your husband, trying to recall all the rules of etiquette that govern this most elite and cultured ritual. Your host enters gracefully, carrying a number of utensils laid out on a tray, and prepares to make and serve powdered green matcha. His exact hand movements are well practiced, guided by years of study. In our culture, tea is serious business, and one that our sources tell us is mainly the domain of men. This isn't strictly true, of course, as we'll soon discover. Today, we're diving properly into the lives of women in Tokugawa-era Japan. We'll take some more tea, explore our house, get ourselves married, and talk about gender roles. So, grab your favorite etiquette books and pack your trousseau. Let's go traveling. But first, a shout out to some of my patrons. My newest pirate queen, Sarah. My newest lady president, Chelsea. My new boss ladies, Luna and Christiana. My new adventuresses, Mia and Erin. My warrior queens, Alexis, Amanda, Ika, Jessica, June, Neve, and Sloane. Kate, Samantha, and Sarah. My imperial empresses, Letitia, Alyssa, Faye, and Whimsy Soapworks. Katie, Samara, and Teresa. And my Lady Pharaohs, Cheryl, Kot, Kate, Kimberly, Laura, Lori, Sophie, and the fabulous Courtneys. This show just wouldn't be possible without the generous support of all my patrons. For just a few dollars a month, they get each episode early and ad-free, access to giveaways, discounts on merch, full interviews with guests, and exclusive bonus episodes. I'm about to publish one on Amaterasu, a Japanese goddess that would pair quite nicely with today's episode. To find it, just go to my website, theexploresspodcast.com. Rise and shine, Edo-era ladies. It's time to get up and get ourselves moving. But first, we have to roll up our beds. This isn't the raised bed you're probably used to. We sleep on individual mattresses spread out on the floor. They're only an inch or two thick, and instead of pillows, wooden padded headrests are our current situation. I hope you had a restful sleep. We'll roll our mattress up and store it in a cupboard for the day. If there's one thing we do not enjoy, it's clutter. Before opening the shutters and brushing off our tatami mats with a broom. What does our typical Japanese house look like? There are many different types of houses in this period, and they will vary depending on whether or not you live in the country or the city, and what your climate is like. The emperor has his sprawling palace in Kyoto, and the shogun and the daimyo have their castles and fortresses. And the majority of the samurai live in the shogun's castle in Edo. the emperor's palace, or in the major cities. If they're of lower rank, they might also live in communal longhouses, which are divided into apartments, or in the 2-floor wooden townhomes called machiya. If you have servants, they sleep wherever they can, though in larger or wealthier homes, they sometimes have their own rooms or dorms. Merchants also live in towns and cities, so they too live in townhouse-style urban houses that have multiple floors and are attached to one another. As Edo grows, filling with wooden houses to accommodate the swelling population, fire becomes a major hazard. In 1657, a massive fire in the city kills around 100,000 people, which results in new standards for the urban setup and a safer form of city living. It's common for most homes to share bathrooms and water sources between neighbors. The majority of Japanese people at this time are farmers, so let's imagine ourselves as farm gals in a typical house in a rural farming village. Most of these homes aren't built to last very long. Japan has hot summers, cold winters, annual typhoons, and rainy seasons, and the occasional earthquake or tsunami. Understandably, the Japanese have a hard time building structures to resist them. Instead, they build houses designed to be easily rebuilt if some catastrophe strikes. The majority are made of wood and feature thatched or tiled roofs, curved upward to allow sunlight to come in. Overhanging eaves are designed to be very wide, to protect windows from heavy rainfall, and most houses are just one story, elevated slightly off the ground by posts. Instead of exterior walls, most homes have shoji, which are essentially sliding doors made with a wood frame and translucent paper screens. Shoji allows sunlight to shine through and act as aesthetically pleasing windows. On fine days, you simply slide the walls of your house open to let the fresh air in. When it rains or snows, you place heavy wooden shutters over the shoji to protect them from the elements. When you enter someone's home, you first step into the genkan, or entryway. This is an area that's usually sunk lower than the floor, and it's where you take off and leave your shoes. Hot tip: never ever wear your shoes inside, due to the Shinto preoccupation with pollution and cleanliness. The genkan functions much like a modern-day mudroom, and its purpose is to keep dirt out. The rest of the house will be covered in tatami mats, a type of flooring made of rice straw sandwiched between 2 layers of soft woven igusa, or lamp rush. These staples of the Japanese household aren't all that different from the rush mats we experienced in England's Tudor era, comfortable to lie on and easy to clean. Once the province of the samurai class, these mats have gotten so popular in the Edo period that almost everyone uses them. There is even an official O-tatami bugyo, or tatami magistrate, to watch over the growing industry. Most Japanese homes don't have much furniture. You might have some floor cushions and a low table in the living room, and then some storage cabinets, hidden cupboards, and chests. Every home also has a stove and a fireplace for cooking and warmth, which is situated in the heart of the home. Outside, you'll have a little shed for housing farming tools, a scullery and wooden trough to prepare and wash food in, and perhaps a stable for your animals. If you're looking for a bathtub to freshen up in, don't bother. There are no baths in private homes. Most people turn instead to communal bathhouses called sento. These bathhouses are used in much the same way the ancient Romans used to enjoy theirs. They're the place to go for hygiene, gossip, and even doing a bit of business. They're cheap enough to get into that those of every class are using them. Some allow for mixed-gender bathing, surprising given the modesty women are expected to show in every other arena. But since these bathing rooms are all dark wood and no windows, perhaps it isn't easy to make out the juicy bits? The shogunate is giving the side eye to mixed bathing, though, which he sees as having the potential for corrupting our morals. Especially given the growing popularity of yuna, or bathhouse girls, who are paid to scrub male customers' backs, and sometimes other things. Know what I'm saying? So where, pray tell, are we going to pee? That mostly depends on our class. If we're in a castle, we're using an indoor squat toilet, essentially an elevated seat with a hole in it and a bucket hidden underneath. Without the ability to flush, we'll simply leave our business where it lies until a servant comes to collect it. Us farm gals are much more likely to be using an outhouse. We'll be getting dressed together in detail in a future episode. For now, though, let's pause while we're dealing with nether region business and talk about menstruation. The Japanese of this era connect our cycle both to nature and to kami, or spirit. There is something almost sacred about it. It's connected with the moon, which we can see in the Japanese word for menstruation, geke, which means something along the lines of going around the moon. But in our most noble circles, we're seeing the rise of the idea that women's bodily particularities, aka birth fluids and menstruation, are sources of pollution. An Edo-era physician refers to menstrual blood as foul blood, while another calls it polluted and putrefied. Which is why some women isolate themselves in moon huts during their periods. They're considered polluted at this time, and heaven forfend they pass it on to others. Are these huts cute little prisons or enjoyable getaways for the Japanese lady? How often are they really used? It's hard to say. As to what we're using to stanch the flow, this depends a lot on what's available to us. Noble ladies tend to use silk floss, called hime no mono, or princess's thing, whereas lower-class women will often use whatever useful scraps of cloth they have around. These might be made of hemp, flax, kudzu, washi, or Japanese paper, as well as the fluff from cattail heads, raw cotton, wisteria, or paper mulberry. Sometimes, like many women throughout history, they simply use their own clothes to do the job. In earlier eras, our undies tended to involve a skirt that wrapped around the hips, which could be pulled up between the legs and fashioned into a makeshift loincloth. By the Edo period, this situation has evolved. A string of absorbent cotton or paper is attached to our undie skirt to form a menstrual belt. This is sometimes called a shita obi, or loincloth, a tezuna, or bridle reins, or even an oba, or horse. We assume because this thing looks a little bit like a horse's bridle. We also might be able to get our hands on a rudimentary tampon. We know that sex workers wad up bits of silk and use them as an absorptive material. They get bonus points because they can be washed and reused. But back to our house. Larger homes tend to have many rooms. A moderately wealthy family might have a living room, the wife might have a separate bedroom, and the grandparents and the eldest son might have their own rooms as well. In poorer homes, you might just have one or two for everyone to share. Regardless, rooms are divided not by interior walls, but by more sliding doors known as fusumas. They're pretty similar to shoji. The only real difference here is that these paper screens are opaque rather than translucent. I mean, we don't always have to be up in each other's business. In the largest and fanciest homes, the rooms nearest the entrance are designated for visitors. The more trusted and familiar you are to the family, the more rooms you're allowed to access. The most private apartments, including the women's quarters, are located deep in the center of the home. These spaces are reserved for family and a select few, like doctors or important advisors. Now, there are a lot of details of the average lady's life in Tokugawa Japan that we just don't know. The ins and outs of women's lives just weren't that well documented. But there are some things we can say for sure. For instance, the higher up in class you are, the more likely you are to live a fairly sequestered life. The situation isn't so different from what we found in ancient Greece. The less money you have, the more likely you are to work and mingle in the same spaces as your menfolk. Even where there aren't enough resources for physical separation, men and women in Japan at this time are operating in very different spheres. Men go out and work, and for the most part, we ladies stay at home to raise the kids and manage the household. We don't tend to eat or even sleep together. But we'll talk more about our amorous situation in our next episode. First, we've gotta hit the books. In our last episode, we found out that Japan's class system is pretty rigid in this period. You were born with the status that you'll take to your grave. A samurai can't up and decide to become a farmer, and an ambitious farmer can't become a merchant. There is no social mobility under the Tokugawas, for men at least. Women, on the other hand, have the freedom to upgrade through marriage. I warn you, the reason the ladies have this freedom isn't cute. It's because we don't have a fixed social status in our own right. That's tied to our household, which is always headed by a man. But this does mean we aren't as tightly bound to the system as men are. Through marriage, we can move from one status group to another, and our parents are more than ready to take advantage. This also means most parents are willing to invest in their daughter's education. If a wealthy merchant's daughter manages to snag a samurai lord's son, that doesn't mean her whole family will become a part of the samurai class, but she will. And that means her family will enjoy greater prestige. A woman marrying up in this way is a very common and accepted practice, and it's usually accomplished because A, the woman is cultured and educated, and B, her father has a lot of money, which the samurai class, living on government salaries mostly paid out in rice, desperately need. Thus, instructional books of the era encourage women to educate themselves in order to attract a good, aka wealthy, husband. Improving oneself is viewed as an important lifelong duty. Young boys and girls are educated together in class-segregated schools until the ages of 7 to 9, at which point some children will continue with their schooling, and most peasant children will head out to the fields. Girls learn household skills like cooking and sewing at the hands of their mothers, and wealthy gals learn about dancing, calligraphy, flower arranging, music, and tea from female tutors. Boys learn skills like accounting or farming to help them with their father's trade. Samurai boys learn calligraphy, classics, politics, weaponry, and tea from elite schools or male tutors. Women's and men's education may look different, and it certainly focuses on gender-specific skills, but our education is viewed as equally valuable as a means of social mobility and also as a smart financial move. Poorer women often make large contributions to the family income, either by weaving silk at home or taking a position as servant, tutor, or attendant in the homes of the elite. But all of that takes education and a certain level of skill. Let's take a little tea break, shall we? When it comes to the Japanese tea ceremony and the tea culture it stems from, we tend to think about it as a feminine art. After all, women make up about 90% of Japan's modern-day tea practitioners. But chanoyu, or the way of tea, was historically a male-dominated art. There's a common misconception that women didn't participate in tea culture until the Meiji period, after the Tokugawa reign ended. The standard narrative is that tea culture was by men for men until the late 1800s. Why were women written out of the history of tea? The tea ceremony first became popular among our friends, the samurai warlords, who use it as a civilized way to bond and create political alliances. After spending decades fighting each other, they needed something to help break the ice, you know? The daimyo, shogun, and the emperor himself all used the tea ceremony as a way to demonstrate their etiquette skills, while also playing politics. Wealthy merchants soon join in, using it to make business connections and prove they're just as refined as the nobility. Many of these men have tea rooms in their homes, build tea houses on the grounds of their castles, employ tea masters as advisors, and gift one another with tea utensils. Tea is not a feminine art, nor is it a hobby to be taken lightly. It's a serious undertaking, founded on the principles of harmony, respect, and the Buddhist concept of Zen. It requires intense study, skill, and dedication, which of course the ladies aren't suited for. During the Tokugawa period, 3 major tea schools sprang up to develop and standardize differing styles of tea ceremony, although there are many other lesser schools as well. Some of these tea masters ban women from enrolling, which is why some people assume that there are no women participating in the era's tea culture at all. But where there's a will, there is always a way. Some schools do have registered female students, though few formally study tea at a school. They either read books, or if they're nobility, they may have a tutor to guide them. Women's books are a blossoming genre during the Tokugawa period, including instructional texts written by tea masters specifically for women. One popular text is called A Woman's Handbook, written specifically for samurai ladies. It's a guide on how to make, serve, and drink tea properly, with detailed diagrams and explanations on everything from how to properly ladle hot water from the kettle to the bowl, to what order in which each utensil should be wiped. While men are drinking tea with military allies or their political foes, women are mostly drinking it with family or household networks, when accompanying their brothers and husbands, or gathering with female companions and attendants. We know this because it's common for a tea ceremony host to keep a record of every gathering, writing down the name of each guest who attends. Tea ceremonies are very intimate affairs, with up to 5 guests in attendance. Many personal diaries from the period note that we ladies are often in attendance at, or even hosting, tea ceremonies. So Tokugawa women are definitely participating in chanoyu. While it isn't exactly scandalous to encourage the ladies to learn tea, there are plenty of conservative men who feel that, if women go anywhere near a teacup, the world is probably going to implode. And while the author of the handbook we mentioned before advocates for women learning the art of tea, he also reminds his female readers that they are still inferior. Or at least that they should act like they are.
Beginners should act as though they know nothing if the kettle is unbalanced.
The author tells us.
All the more so, women should appear to know nothing.
Yes, the I'm just a stupid little lady defense, one of history's tried and true favorites. The author also makes sure to thoroughly cover what he feels is proper behavior for women, stressing that they must always be moral and modest. For instance, he lays out specific rules for guarding against too much male-female intimacy at the table. When guests pass the tea bowl around, a woman shouldn't pass it to a man by hand. Scandalous. She should instead place the bowl on the floor, and he'll pick it up from there. I mean, if Bridgerton has taught us one thing, it's that touching hands can certainly be dangerous. Given some of the barriers for women learning the art of tea, why are so many keen to do it anyway? Because learning tea is a symbol of civility, education, and culture. Elite samurai women use it to learn how to comport themselves in a feminine and graceful manner. Studying tea also means learning to sit, stand, and move in an elegant way. Both hosts and guests have to have extensive knowledge of all the many rules of etiquette that govern the ceremony. Samurai women aren't the only ones learning tea, though. Many from the lower classes also study tea culture in the hopes of bagging a wealthy man, or of finding a job in a samurai woman's household. We learned last episode that there are over 200 daimyo samurai lords, all of whom have wives and children living as virtual hostages in and around the shogun's massive castle in Edo. These wives and children all need servants, tutors, and attendants. And many commoner ladies are keen to take the roles, but to win them, education is everything. This is one of the reasons so many peasant gals are studying tea in their spare time. It's a great way to learn how to behave like the nobility. Many samurai women are looking to hire attendants who are civilized enough to accompany them to tea ceremonies. When Nishimiya Hide, the 16-year-old daughter of a low-ranking samurai, applied for a position as an attendant to Yoshiko, the wife of daimyo lord Tokugawa Nariaki, she was asked to compose a poem, display her knowledge of fashion, and, of course, pour a proper cup of tea. In other words, tea is key to moving on up. You walk into a candlelit room where a girl in a feathered mask greets you. Her identity is one of your city's best-kept secrets. No one knows the true face of a nightbird, and that isn't why you came anyway. You're here for this girl's rare and highly illegal magic. She is about to gift it to you with just a kiss for a price. Welcome to the world of Nightbirds, my 1920s tinted fantasy novel, which you can buy now wherever good books are sold. If you like female-focused stories with lots of historical inspiration, glittering settings, and intrigue, I think it might just be for you. The NIGHTBIRDS paperback is coming out on June 4th, and its sequel, FYREBIRDS, will hit shelves on August 27th. If you're at all interested, I would love it if you'd pre-order a copy. Early sales mean an incredible amount to authors in terms of supporting their careers. If you'd like a recap of NIGHTBIRDS before the sequel comes out, or you just want to go behind the scenes on my writing process as you read it for the first time, why not check out my other podcast, Pub Dates? I'm about to start a series of NIGHTBIRDS read-along episodes over there, and listeners will have a chance to win a very special prize. So, be careful who you kiss, and fly carefully. So, we know we've been hitting the books to help us land a dashing beau, and now wedding bells are ringing. Congrats, lady! Let's talk about marriage, which is incredibly important and almost universal for the ladies in Tokugawa Japan. For the samurai, it's a way to cement political alliances, and for the lower classes, it's a vital means of securing heirs and providing additional sources of labor. In our upper classes, marriages are family-brokered affairs. Dowries are negotiated between male heads of households, and especially amongst the samurai class, arranged marriages are the norm. The prospective bride and groom don't have much say in the matter. So, I hope you haven't been harboring dreams of running off with the neighbor's son. Amongst the lower classes, families are still heavily involved in their children's marriages, but it's more likely the bride and groom will marry for love. In fact, the practice of yobai, or night visits, is common among these classes. This is the Tokugawa equivalent of moving in together before getting engaged. A try-before-you-buy situation. It's usually a long period of premarital cohabitation to make sure both parties are really compatible. And although it's frowned upon by the Shogun and his officials, it's pretty widespread in farming villages. What your wedding looks like depends a whole lot on your class. If you're marrying a daimyo lord, for instance, and you're the daughter of the shogun, the ceremony will likely be very formal and involve a whole lot of money. In order to welcome you, your daimyo beau has to build a whole new compartment onto his house. Marriages between samurai are very luxurious and involve such lavish displays of wealth, while peasant weddings are monitored by officials to make sure they aren't inappropriately luxurious. Sexy. None of our weddings are religious in nature. There are no Shinto practices involved until later periods. We will likely get married in a white kosode kimono and a chikake outer robe, topped off with a white floss silk headdress. After some ritual sake drinking, we'll change into a kosode presented to us by our new husband, which might be red, gold, or silver, perhaps painted with auspicious symbols for longevity and good fortune. We will then be swept away in a ritualistic procession from our home to our new husbands, lugging our trousseau along as well. Trousseaux are a big part of our dowry, and those of samurai and wealthy merchants are incredibly involved. They include lavish clothes, furniture, cutlery, cosmetic sets, you name it. In 1620, when the daughter of a daimyo married the emperor, her procession was guarded by 100 soldiers, 32 high-ranking ladies in carriages, and 36 maids on palanquins. Her trousseau consisted of 260 cedar chests and other furniture, carried by 29 groups of porters in matching blue livery. It must have been a sight to be seen. Let's pretend we've married Tom Hiddleston. Look, I know he's not Japanese, but he's my time-traveling husband of choice, okay? Once married, we'll be living with Tom at his place. If he's an eldest son, he definitely lives with his parents, as their land will pass on to him. Younger sons have the option of either staying at home or working for their brothers, or leaving and finding work elsewhere. Thus, the majority of new brides are in the unenviable situation of having to move straight in with their in-laws. Theoretically, a woman is supposed to completely devote herself to her new husband and his family and totally cut ties with her own. In practice, this hardly ever happens. Women remain close to their families and depend on them for emotional and financial support, especially if they end up being widowed or divorced and having to return to their childhood homes. Now, if a family only has daughters, their land doesn't pass on to the eldest because patriarchy. Instead, the family seeks a husband for that daughter and they welcome him into the fold. They essentially adopt him so that their lands can pass on to him. In these situations, the bride doesn't have to leave her family's home. Her new husband is simply going to move in with her. For most brides, this situation is the preferred one. See, when a young bride has to go to her new husband's house, many of the household chores that used to be the responsibility of her new mother-in-law are transferred to her. She not only has to look after her husband, but also her in-laws, while the mother-in-law can begin a long-anticipated life of leisure. Many of these mothers-in-law bully their new daughters, forcing them to act as their personal maids, constantly criticizing how they run the household. Sounds fun, I guess? We've married Tom Hiddleston, who is utter perfection. So even though your mother-in-law is a real piece of work, we're game to stick it out. What do our lives in our new household look like? The eldest male in the family is the head of the household, and he reigns supreme. Family members defer to him in all matters. Wives might have influence over their husbands, but if they do, they know to exercise it only in private. The status of each member of the family is rigid, and it's reflected in how each one sits down to eat. The head of the house always takes the seat facing the passageway at the head of the table. The two seats next to him are taken by guests or the eldest son or the eldest daughter's husband. The other men sit at the opposite head. It's a real sausage fest up in here. What are the ladies doing? Cooking, carrying the food to the table, and serving the menfolk. We don't eat with the men, though. We take our meals separately after they've finished, or we simply eat in hastily snatched moments in the scullery. Which is rude, to be honest. Girls gotta eat. Side note, what are we eating? For most of us, 2 meals a day is the norm, except for farmers during strenuous periods where they're doing intense manual labor, at which point we'll add in a 3rd meal. Our diet largely depends on our class, income, and the occasion, but tea is always served, though not the fancy kinds served at the tea ceremony. We'll likely eat a lot of miso soup, vegetables, rice, or a rice-like substitute, cereals like wheat, barley, and millet, and perhaps some seafood. Samurai eat a lot of rice. I mean, they are paid in it, while peasants are encouraged to eat a mix of rice and gruel or cereals instead. For many, fish is the biggest source of protein. Beef and other meats are very rarely on the table, partly for religious reasons, and partly to preserve those animals for military and agricultural work. Sake is drunk on special occasions, and snacks are often eaten between meals, including manju, steamed cakes made from sugar and rice flour, and yokan, slabs of sweetened bean jelly. I don't know about you, but I'm getting hungry. Now, back to etiquette. There are many rules we're meant to follow, all of which make clear that we ladies are inferior to our men. For example, while indoors, women are meant to sit back on our heels on the floor in a kneeling position. I hope you've got a regular yoga practice, time traveler, or your feet are going to be in agony. Men don't have to do this. They're allowed to sit more informally in a cross-legged position. When women greet someone, say goodbye, or receive an instruction from their husband, they are supposed to place their hands on the floor and bow from that kneeling position, lowering their forehead all the way to the floor. In the rare event a wife is allowed to accompany her husband in public, she is supposed to walk a step behind him and defer to him in every way. These rules, and many others, are spelled out in over 2,000 titles published during the Tokugawa period, addressing the roles and behavior of women. Apparently, male writers of the time have some real opinions on the subject. And look, when it comes to using these to try and figure out what life was really like for women in this period, we shouldn't take any of them as gospel. They're pretty much all written by men riding very tall moral horses, laying out some fabled ideal. These texts are clearly concerned about the dangers the ladies pose, and thus seek to ensure we know our place. They define filial piety, or loyalty and obedience to one's elders and superiors, read men, as sacrosanct. One such text cautions,
Do not forget to deeply honor one's parents or neglect the path of filial duty. Do not scorn or make light of one's husband and flaunt oneself, for this disregards the way of heaven. Do not treat your parents-in-law poorly, or you will earn the scorn of others. Do not neglect your stepchildren and then ignore the criticism of others.
Another text, entitled The Three Paths of Moral Teachings for Women, describes the 3 life phases of any proper woman: filial daughter, chaste and loyal wife, and wise mother. Writing in 1885, the progressive thinker Fukuzawa Yukichi will complain,
Women exist at the mercy of men, and their security and their fate are in the hands of men. Women's lives are nothing but a series of services, first to parents when young, then to husbands and parents-in-law when married.
Indeed, women are meant to serve the family and the household above all other things, and display qualities such as thrift, restraint, sacrifice, and modesty. These books advise women to
get up earlier than anyone else and apply herself to the work of the household. Work from morning to night even if you are ill or injured. There should be no excuses not to perform your duties. Put aside desire. Do not be selfish. Give yourself unstintingly to the child and their upbringing.
Similarly, we ladies are advised not to become jealous of our husband's mistresses, to avoid sowing discord within the household. Having concubines and mistresses is practically a way of life for the shogun, daimyo, and other high-ranking samurai men. And although lower-class men can't afford to maintain a mistress, cheating is exceedingly common. And there are specific pleasure districts to cater just to that, something we'll be talking about a lot next episode. Wives are expected to be loyal, of course, but men are expected to do no such thing. If a man spends too much money on prostitutes, his wife is often blamed for not doing enough to tempt him to stay home with her. I hope anyone saying things like that catches a venereal disease post-haste. Staying home is really where it's at for the women of Tokugawa Japan. A good, proper wife stays inside and manages the household, while the men go outside and work. This is the natural order of things, according to our delightful women's texts, and many offer cautionary tales about what happens to women who disobey this rule, attempt to enter public life, and thus cause the downfall of their country. They are dubbed castle toppers, and they're the worst kind of woman. One educated lady of the period wrote proudly,
Regarding the way of the women, spend your days within the household, do no wrong, and follow righteous principles. Express gentleness and make it a virtue, and be sure to have faith in all your actions. Food, drink, and clothing are not things to be discussed outside the household. If you violate this principle, It is at variance with the way of heaven, and chaos will surely ensue. I will remain until the end of the day within the home, with various excellent works of history and women's writing to serve as my teachers. Those inclined to do differently should take this as a warning. I hope that they mend their errant ways and turn out well.
And so, in theory, most Japanese women spend their lives tending to the home and to their families, cloistered from the outside world. In practice, though, things aren't quite that cut and dry. Many women work closely with their husbands in their businesses. If you're married to a farmer, for instance, you likely help him out in the fields, and you might also weave silk at night, as well as tending to your household duties. If you're married to a merchant, you might help in the shop, create goods to sell, and balance the books. And if you're married to a samurai, well, you definitely aren't being invited to participate in political discussions or military training. But hey, you do have servants to help you with household chores, and thus have more leisure time to spend on education and your favorite hobbies, such as the tea ceremony or arranging flowers. As is the case with pretty much every time and place, there are many women who get out of their houses to work. These ladies often have no choice because they are extremely poor. Some of them might see their fathers sell them off to the pleasure districts to help provide another income for the family. Or they might be educated enough to be hired as a tutor, servant, or lady's attendant in an elite household. These latter women leave their families and travel to cities for work, and are able to land better marriages because of it. One such woman, Inoue Suko, takes exactly this route. In 1681, at just 22 years old, this very smart cookie left her home and traveled for 2 weeks to get to Edo in order to tutor the mother of a daimyo. Unfortunately, she and her father are stopped at the border checkpoint by travel inspectors, as Inoue's passport and travel documents describe her as a woman rather than an unmarried girl. The shogunate view all female travelers as suspect, since, after all, he's keeping most samurai women hostage, and thus officials literally police the movement of women to and from the capital. Poor Inoue is forced to wait 2 weeks to procure replacement documents. In her diary, she wrote,
I was very upset, and not knowing what to do or how to get through this, I regretted my very existence. Whatever one does, there are so many obstacles if one inhabits the body of a woman. I could not stop thinking about how many things are difficult for us.
Eventually, she is allowed to take up her tutoring post, which she holds for 8 years, before returning home upon her employer's death, marrying a local official and bearing him 5 children. Thus, it is possible for Tokugawa women to assert some measure of independence, provided they have the support of their families. Still, Inoue's story makes it clear that independent women are viewed with suspicion, if not open hostility. Although we ladies are generally considered inferior to men, this doesn't mean our contributions aren't valued. The Tokugawas acknowledge the importance of women in upholding society. After all, they're the ones doing the cooking, cleaning, sewing, birthing and raising of children, supervising servants, assisting their husbands, and nurturing familial and spousal relationships. In their roles as household managers, women hold an underrated but potent form of power in a deeply patriarchal society. Tom, of course, is a great husband and listens to all our opinions. But what happens if you get the mother-in-law from hell and your marriage just isn't working out? How easy is it to get divorced in Tokugawa Japan? It's actually pretty common in the period, and there aren't any stigmas associated with divorce or remarriage. In fact, among samurai, the divorce rate hovers around 10%. Among the lower classes, it's more like 20%. This doesn't mean that women are living their best single lives after divorce, though. The remarriage rate for divorcees and widows is around 50%, and it's usually out of financial necessity. There aren't many laws associated with divorce, as the government prefers that sort of thing to be worked out amongst families. However, there are laws against adultery, and the law makes no distinction between rape and consensual extramarital affairs. Both are considered adultery, and both the man and woman involved are punished harshly. By law, officials can technically sentence adulterers to death, as the government views marriage as a metaphor for the government, and thus adultery symbolizes treason. Yikes! Most village officials don't go that far, though, preferring to settle things with payments to the wronged parties, banishment, or letters of apology. And look, given how common it is for a man to have a mistress in this period, the law can't be cracking down that hard. Assuming adultery is not on the table, a man has a pretty easy time initiating a divorce. If a samurai wants to call it quits, he just needs the approval of his daimyo. If the daimyo wants a divorce, he has to get the approval of the shogun. For everyone in the lower classes, no such approval is needed. All a husband has to do is present his wife with a mikudarihan. This is simply a short statement saying that he wants a divorce. A man can present the mikudarihan to his wife at any time. Surprise, honey! And here's the kicker, he doesn't even have to give a reason. Although it seems like this is frowned upon by many. One popular women's book says there are only 7 valid reasons for a man to divorce his wife.
First, if she does not obey her parents. Second, if she is unable to bear children. Third, if she is promiscuous. Fourth, if she is envious. Fifth, if she has a serious illness. Sixth, if she is overly talkative. Seventh, if she steals.
In other words, mouthy, barren, flirty, or chronically ill ladies, get ready to get served. Despite it being only 3.5 lines long, this written note is super important. A woman can't remarry if she doesn't have one. This reminds me of the parents' notes we used to have to bring into the office if we wanted to show up late to high school. Once a woman is presented with the mikudarihan, she's expected to immediately return to her old family's house. She has no legal means of protesting the divorce, even if she's pregnant. At least her now ex-husband is expected to return her dowry and her belongings. But if the couple have children, they stay with the father, and joint custody is pretty rare. If the couple's in a situation where the husband was adopted into the wife's family, he simply leaves, and the children stay with the mother. It's always the spouse who comes into the household upon marriage who has to leave. So, can we ladies present our husbands with one of these short notes and get divorced? Of course not! Men can initiate divorce easily, but the ladies have little to no power to do the same. Although some may be able to persuade their husbands to write the mikudarihan, or ask their families to pressure him into doing so, many husbands aren't willing to give up their unpaid sources of domestic and emotional labor. Luckily, the truly desperate amongst us have an escape hatch. We can flee to the sanctuary of the Enkaridera, or Divorce Temple. There are 2 such temples in Japan, Tokeiji and Mantokuji, both originally set up as refuges for women with abusive husbands. So long as a woman makes it to the temple's threshold, her husband can't follow her in there, as men are not allowed. Boy, bye! Once a woman arrives, temple authorities will reach out to her husband to try to negotiate, often bringing in the leader of the local village to persuade him to write the mikudarihan. If this negotiation is successful, a woman can leave the temple and return to her family a free woman. If the man still refuses to grant his wife a divorce, she'll remain and serve as a nun for 3 years. After this period of service, the marriage is legally dissolved by the temple official and she is free to go. In this time and place, that's not a bad deal. That's it for now. In our next episode, we'll don some kimonos and paint our faces with a very special group of ladies, the geishas. Get ready to explore Japan's pleasure districts and pull the curtain back on some of the era's most unique and powerful women. Until next time. Thanks for listening. If you like the Exploress, tell a friend about it, leave a comment or review wherever you listen, become a patron of the show, or just shoot me a message on Instagram or an email via my website. Hearing from you always delights me. Much love to Carly Quinn for all her help researching and writing this episode. You can find show notes and images at my website, theexploresspodcast.com. You can also find me over on Instagram at the Exploress Podcast. Much love to Josh Stackhouse for my theme music, Mr. Exploress for my logo, and to the following for their vocal stylings: May Kay and Theo Akemaru.